Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the full RBFF, MRAA, and NMMA teams, thank you very much for joining us today. I'm Rachel Piacenza, the Director of Marketing at RBFF. Really happy to be here with you all to present these findings from our Boat Ownership Experience Research Project, which was a joint project between RBFF, MRAA, NMMA, and our research partner, Left Brain Marketing. A few housekeeping items just before we begin. This webinar is being recorded, and I have faith we're all professionals at this by this point, but just a reminder to please keep yourselves on mute to reduce extra noise during the webinar. As questions arise, please type your questions out in the question and answer box, which is located on the right side of the screen. Please be sure to indicate that you'd like your question to be sent directly to the organizer. We'll be monitoring questions throughout the webinar, and we will address all questions at the end. If we run short on time, any questions not addressed virtually will follow up with you directly via email. A copy of the research presentation reviewed today will be on our takemefishing.org website later today following the webinar. A brief background here just before we get started today with the results. Customer retention has long been a focal point in the boating industry, especially with first-time boaters. And we see the same with retention of new anglers. Fixing this leaky bucket is key to the industry's long-term growth. Further adding another layer of complexity is the fact that first-time boat ownership surged as a result of the COVID pandemic. Many new boaters are at risk of leaving the category. In summer of 2021, RBFF, in partnership with MRAA and NMMA, commissioned a study with Left Brain Marketing Incorporated to identify opportunities to enhance the boating ownership experience for the benefit of boaters and the industry. Step one in accomplishing this is mapping a customer journey, beginning with the shopping process and finishing through the first year of ownership. With us today to present top takeaways from the research is Jerry Mona, project lead for this research and president of Left Brain Marketing Incorporated. Jerry brings decades of experience in the marine industry and is often considered the foremost research expert with boaters. Jerry, on behalf of all of us, thank you for being with us today to present these exciting results.
Terrific. Hey, thank you, Rachel, for that introduction and for everyone out there who is joining us in today's webinar. Again, my name is Jerry Mona with Left Brain Marketing, and it's a pleasure to be with each of you. I have been doing research in the boating industry for over 3 decades now, and I believe that the study that we are going to review today is one of the most important that I've ever been a part of. So I hope you likewise find this information to be interesting and important for your business. Before we get started, I'd like to briefly tell you a little bit about myself and my company. After completing grad school, my first job was with the Coca-Cola Company Foods Division. Now it's referred to as the Minute Maid Company. There, I learned how to do research from some of the best in the business. After several years, I followed my passion for boating and took a position to head up the research function within Mercury. I also served in other marketing management roles while with Mercury and then later with Brunswick. In April of 2000, I left the corporate world to launch Left Brain Marketing, a research company designed to bring quality research to the boating industry, something that I had observed was lacking. Over the past 22 years, I've had the pleasure of working with several marine manufacturers and other businesses and trade associations to provide insights into their customer needs and wants, help develop new products, and provide guidance on a variety of marketing issues. In fact, I was heavily involved in the initial research and planning that led to the launch of the Discover Boating program back in 2004. But my involvement in boating and fishing started long before that. Since the age of 5, I've been an avid angler and love being on the water. Many of my early childhood pictures were of me holding fish, which is no small feat considering I grew up in the state of Iowa. I also love water sports too. So this strapping young man in the bottom here is me holding up the ski pyramid during the Lake Panorama Days parade back in the mid-'80s. And this old guy over here on the far right is myself, yours truly, cutting it up on my home lake last summer. So with over 3 decades of experience doing research with boaters and a lifelong passion for boating and fishing, I have a good feel for boaters and know how to talk to them. But even more than that, I have a passion for the boating lifestyle and how to improve upon it, which is why I was thrilled to be a part of such an important project as this. So now just to tell you give you a little bit of background about the study. As Rachel had mentioned, the pandemic led to, of course, a surge in boat sales, as you all know, which brought in many first-time boat owners. The RBFF, MRAA, and Discover Boating were concerned that the initial experience of these new boaters might not have been optimal, especially considering all the things that were going on at that point in time. The fear was that some of these new boaters might be disenchanted with the boating lifestyle and eventually defect or exit boating altogether. So the goal of the study was to identify the challenges and frustrations with the boat shopping, purchase, and ownership experience. Ultimately, if we could identify and fix these challenges, we might be able to enhance the boat ownership experience and keep more people in boating. So in terms of approach, we did a 2-part study. We did a qualitative study first, followed by a quantitative survey. For the qualitative, we interviewed 48 boaters last summer over the phone. Each interview was about 60 minutes in length on average. And there we talked about their needs, wants, and frustrations with everything from shopping to purchase to ownership to maintaining their boat. The insights we gained from those qualitative interviews then was used to form the quantitative survey, which is what we'll be focused on here today. For the online survey, we received responses from 653 recent boat buyers, most of which who purchased a boat between 2020 and 2021, but we also had some from 2019 as well. It consisted of a mix of first-time and repeat boat owners, as well as those who bought their boat new versus those who bought used. The sample was, we recruited participants from state boater registration lists, thanks to the folks at InfoLink, but I also supplemented the sample too with my in-house boater panel that I have accumulated over many years of doing research with boaters. The analysis was quite extensive. We collected a lot of data, but for the purposes of this webinar, I boiled it down to the top 4 takeaways, which is what we're going to go through. So I'm going to read each of those here initially, and then we're going to go through them in detail one at a time. The first key takeaway is that though identifying boats for sale during the pandemic was difficult, boaters were mostly satisfied with the shopping and purchase experience. However, better product training is desired. Used buyers are nearly as satisfied as new purchasers with their boat, but are far less likely to visit a dealer for maintenance or service work. Those who visit a dealer for maintenance or service are mostly happy with the quality of the work performed, but feel that cost and turnaround time are unreasonable. And then finally, a vast majority of first-time and repeat boat owners intend to remain in boating. However, underutilization and cost of ownership are key risk factors for defection. There are other factors too, but those are some of the important ones that are often overlooked. Okay, so now we're going to go with the first key takeaway. Though identifying boats for sale during the pandemic was difficult, boaters were mostly satisfied with the shopping and purchase experience. However, better product training is desired. Near the beginning of the survey, we asked respondents to indicate why they purchased their boat when they did. In other words, we want to know what drove the timing of their purchase. So this chart shows the main reason given for those who purchased in 2020 calendar year only. The blue bar represents responses from first-time boaters. The light gray bar refers to responses from repeat boaters. As you can see, the most common reasons for why folks bought a boat at that particular time were kind of the standard reasons. Came across an excellent deal, finally had the funds to purchase a boat, or recently purchased a place on or near the water. However, for many first-time boaters, COVID was also an important motivator. So 18% of first-time boaters had indicated that COVID was the primary reason why they bought their boat when they did. This little asterisk here just indicates that this is significantly higher than the percent of repeat boaters who said that COVID was a key reason. It's not surprising that this was less of a factor for repeat boaters because many of these folks already had a boat at that point in time and had a way to safely social distance and recreate with their family. In addition to knowing why they bought their boat when they did, we wanted to know how they shopped for a boat. So in the initial qualitative research, we asked boaters to describe the steps they went through when shopping for a boat. Now, while the process varied considerably from one boater to the next, we identified 8 common steps or jobs that many boaters go through. Oftentimes, boaters start off with identifying their needs. And by that, I mean deciding what type of boat they want, what size of boat, how much they want to spend. Are there some specific features or functions that they're looking for? Once they do that, the next step is then to look for boats available near them that fit their needs or requirements. However, as you will soon see, this second step was a source of quite frustration during the pandemic because boats were short supplies and folks often had to travel long distances in order to find a boat that may satisfy their needs. Once they've identified boats near them, the next step was to determine which boats to pursue further. So this is basically narrowing down the list of boats to say 1, 2, or a few boats that seem to meet their requirements. And then to get gather some additional information and make an inquiry about that boat, whether it's at a dealer or from a private party. From that point, the next step is to physically take a look at the boat to assess the boat quality and suitability. Okay, to make sure it's actually it is what you're looking for and worth the price that's being asked. Assuming that's a go, the next step is to negotiate your best price or make the best deal. However, I will say that during the pandemic, boaters expressed to us that this too was a challenging step because boats were going fast and there were a long line of people looking to buy a boat. So there was very little room to negotiate. Once a fair price is agreed upon, the next step is to purchase or secure the boat. Now, if someone was buying a boat from a private party and it was a cash purchase, a lot of times they take the boat home the same day. Other times they'd be putting down a down payment to pick up the boat at a later date, take possession at a later date, once the paperwork was in order or the boat was ready. And then the final step was to learn how to operate the boat. And here I'm not talking about, traditional boating and trailering skills, but rather specific how to learn how to operate the specific features and functions of the boat that you just purchased. Now, while those are the common steps, I'll just again want to emphasize the fact that the order of these steps often varies across boaters, and some of these jobs or steps are repeated or skipped, and the process was very much the same for first-time and repeat boaters. Now let's take a look at boater satisfaction with the shopping process at a high level. Okay, so we just talked about the steps. Now we're going to talk about satisfaction with the overall process. So this chart shows overall satisfaction with the information or assistance available to help purchase a boat. The results are based on a 5-point scale ranging from not at all satisfied all the way up to completely satisfied. And the green bar represents the results for respondents in total, and the various colored bars represent responses from different segments. So first-time boaters versus repeat, those who bought a new boat versus used, and those who bought from a dealer versus those who bought from a private party. I want to point out that this is what we're talking about here is satisfaction with the information or assistance available to help them shop for or purchase a boat. We're not talking about, this is without regard to the source of that information or assistance. In other words, this is not an evaluation of dealers, manufacturers, or trade associations. As you can see here, boaters are moderately satisfied with the overall information assistance available to help them shop for a boat. So a score of 4.2 out of 5 on average. And this did not vary much between first time and repeat boaters, as you can see here. So this is a decent score, but we can do better. So this is a breakdown of how these total responses shake out across the different scale points. And you can see that 44% of our respondents said that they gave it the highest rating or were completely satisfied with the information or assistance available. 1/3 rated it a 4, and then you had about 23%, or nearly 1 in 4, said that you can do a much better job, rated a 3 or less. So again, definitely room for improvement here with the shopping experience. Now let's take a look at customer satisfaction with the specific shopping or purchase jobs or tasks. So here we're looking at the results for the sample in total, and I've arranged the items from highest to lowest satisfaction, okay? And again, these ratings are about, it's all based on a 5-point scale, and these ratings are about satisfaction with the information or assistance available rather than the source of that information or assistance. As you can see, boaters were pretty satisfied for the most part with completing the paperwork and physically taking possession of their boat. However, there were some areas that could use some improvement. Identifying boats for sale in my area was a concern, was a challenge for reasons that are, I think, fairly evident. What boaters told us is that the boats were in short supply. There were a lot of dead listings out there, meaning if it's boats listed for sale that were no longer on the market, or dealer inventories were not up to date. So that was a source of frustration. Contacting the dealer or seller and determining what brands or models to pursue further was also an area of dissatisfaction, and that was largely because it was a bit of a scramble at that point in time. It was often hard to reach the seller or dealer to get additional information to help decide which boats to pursue further. This issue of finding a financing source pertained mostly to used boats. For new boats, this was rated at a 4.4, which is pretty decent, but for used, it was a 4.0. So obviously getting financing is more difficult on a used purchase. We just looked at satisfaction with various shopping tasks. Now let's take a look at satisfaction with the seller or dealer specifically. So this chart shows overall satisfaction with the purchase experience from the dealer or seller. As you can see, in total, boaters are moderately satisfied with their purchase experience. And there was very little difference across the various segments, including first-time boaters versus repeat boaters, as well as those who bought from a dealer, 4.3, versus those who bought from a private party, which is also 4.3. So now what we're going to do is take a look at customer satisfaction with the specific purchase experience metrics. So the bright blue bar on this page represents the responses from those who bought a boat from a dealer. The gray bar represents the responses from those who bought from a private party. And as I just mentioned a moment ago, overall satisfaction was the same regardless of which of those two sources one bought their boat from, 4.3. However, there were some notable differences. Those who bought from a private party were more likely to say that the process was quick and easy. I believe the reason for this is that a lot of these private party purchases likely were cash purchases, and so there would have been much less paperwork to complete. On the other hand, those who bought from a dealer were more likely to think that the salesperson was much more knowledgeable than the person who sold, than those who bought from a private party, so 4.3 versus 4.0. However, regardless of which source, boaters in general were dissatisfied with the overview of the boat features and functions that they received at the time they purchased their boat. So the question is, how necessary is it to provide a thorough overview of the boat features and functions? As it turns out, it's actually really quite necessary, especially for first-time boaters. So we asked respondents to rate their knowledge or confidence in various boater skills at the time they first took possession of their boat. The dark blue bar represents responses from first-time boaters. The gray bar, once again, represents responses from repeat boaters. The numbers represent the percentage of respondents who indicated that they were highly or moderately confident with each item. In other words, they rated it a 5 or a 4. Not surprisingly, first-time boaters are significantly less knowledgeable or confident than repeat boaters on each of these skill areas, including knowing their boating laws and regulations, general boating and trailering skills, how to properly brake in an engine, how to operate the standard equipment, and how to operate the electronic accessories on their boat. However, the key thing to note is the degree to which the knowledge or confidence is lacking. So you can see that between roughly 1/3 to almost a half of first-time boaters did not feel very confident in each of these skill areas. One of the things that we heard during the qualitative interviews was that boaters often felt pretty inadequate when they first received their boat to know how to properly operate it, and hoped that they wouldn't do much wouldn't do too much damage to people or property when they were first learning how to use it. In addition to lacking confidence with basic boating skills, first-time boaters also do not consider themselves very knowledgeable regarding how to properly maintain their boat. So here we're looking at how knowledgeable boaters felt about various maintenance tasks when they first took possession of their boat. So the dark blue bars, once again, represent first-time boaters. The gray bar represents repeat boaters. By the way, the asterisk here just denotes that this is significantly different than the blue bar. The numbers represent the percentage of respondents who say that they are very or moderately knowledgeable with each item. In other words, they rated a 4 or a 5. So as you can see here, roughly half of first-time boaters do not feel very knowledgeable with each maintenance task on an overall basis and with each item, including how knowledgeable they are of trailer maintenance, engine maintenance, and knowing how to wash and wax their boat. So this is concerning because, as you'll see in a moment, a lot of boaters, especially those who purchased a used boat, tend to do their own maintenance. Used buyers, the second takeaway is that used buyers are nearly equally satisfied as new with their boat, but are far less likely to visit a dealer for maintenance or service work. In the survey, we asked boaters whether they experienced any problems requiring repairs. Now remember, most of the people that we surveyed had owned their boat for only a short period of time, in most cases somewhere between 3 months to a year. As you can see, 60% of used boat buyers had incurred some sort of issue requiring repair, which was significantly higher than that of the new boat buyers. So now let's take a look at where these new and used boat buyers go to get help with either their maintenance or service needs. So the first two columns in this table represent where new versus used buyers go for maintenance help, whether they go and do it themselves, go to a dealer, a marina or storage facility, an independent mechanic, or some other source. The last two columns represent where new versus used boat buyers go for service repairs. As you can see, incredibly, only 9% of used boat buyers go to a dealer for maintenance work versus 50% of those who bought their boat new. And it's not much better on the service side. Only 15% of used boat buyers go to a dealer for help versus 80% among those who bought their boat new. Now this number is high, of course, because a lot of these repairs will be things that are under warranty, so naturally they're going to return to their dealer. But as you can see, the used boat buyers are much more likely to do the work themselves or go to an independent mechanic. In fact, and what's very interesting about this is even if they bought their boat used from a dealer, this phenomenon still holds. Now, and though it's not shown on this page, I took a look at that, and if they bought their boat used from a dealer, only 15% returned to a dealer for help with maintenance, and only 24% returned to a dealer for service. So the question is, why is this happening? Is it about saving money or something else? Depending on the answer to that question, it could be a huge opportunity for marine dealers to reach out to the used boat market. We know that used boat buyers are more likely to incur problems, but what about their satisfaction with their boat? This chart shows overall satisfaction with the boat package broken out by the various customer segments. As you can see, the average score among those who bought their boat new was 4.4, which was pretty close to that average satisfaction among those who bought their boat used. And despite the fact that these folks incurred more problems, I suspect the reason for this is that a used boat buyer naturally expect to have more issues when buying used and consider it a worthwhile trade-off for the money saved. So those who visit a dealer for maintenance or service are mostly happy with the quality of the work performed, but feel that the cost and turnaround time are unreasonable. So just a moment ago, I kind of showed you the breakout of new versus used boaters and whether they go to a dealer. On this table, I look at them new and used on a combined basis. So looking at total boaters, and in total, about 20% go to a dealer for maintenance, 30% for service, and 40% go to a dealer for either one, either maintenance or service. So what we're going to do now is going to take a look at this 40%, and take a look at their satisfaction with the maintenance or service work performed. So this chart shows overall satisfaction with the dealer that performs the maintenance and or service work. And as you can see, not only on an overall basis, but on some key metrics. And then as you can see here, boaters, by the way, this is for responses in total. As you can see here that boaters in general think that dealers do a fairly good job, an okay job, not great, but okay job in terms of being courteous and performing the work correctly the first time. However, they're not at all happy with the reasonableness of the cost or the turnaround time. And of these factors, the things that are most impactful, the things that most have the biggest impression on overall satisfaction with the dealer are courtesy and turnaround time. So anyway, we just talked about how boaters are not very happy with the cost for service repairs, but now let's take a look at that in the context of other boating expenses. So this chart shows, we asked respondents to rate the reasonableness of various boating expenses. Again, this is for the total sample. And some of these expenses did not pertain to all boaters. For example, not everyone has a ramp or launch fee, and a lot of people store their boat at home, and so this would pertain. So for those people, they were not asked to rate those particular items. As you can see here, boaters are not crazy about the cost of repairs or fuel, 3.4 and 3.3 respectively. However, at least at the time we took this survey, the cost for fuel was more of an annoyance, because when I examined this further, this item was not a big driver of their overall cost of ownership perceptions. Instead, repair costs and routine maintenance costs were in fact a big driver of the overall cost of boat ownership, even more so than the purchase price of the boat. Now, I know some of you are thinking that, are a little bit surprised to see the purchase price of the boat being rated this high or this reasonable, but this is a little bit misleading, because if you break that out further, you see that that's actually driven by the perceived price of used boats as opposed to new. So you can see used boat prices were rated significantly higher than that of new. Lastly, a vast majority of first-time and repeat boat owners intend to remain in boating. However, underutilization and the cost of ownership are key risk factors for defection. So near the end of the survey, we asked respondents about their overall ownership experience, including their shopping and purchase experience, how much they like their boat, their level of usage, the amount of upkeep, and the overall expense. So this chart shows the overall satisfaction with the ownership experience in total and by the various segments that we've been showing here today. As you can see, boaters are moderately satisfied with their overall ownership experience overall, 4.2 out of 5, and this did not vary much across the segments. And if I break this total responses down by the different scale points, you can see that 44% of boaters rated their experience as a 5 or completely satisfied. 40% gave it a rating of 4, and then we had about 16% who rated a 3 or less. So for the most part, boaters are pretty happy with their overall ownership experience for the most part. But one thing that impacts overall ownership satisfaction is how often somebody gets to use their boat. So in the survey, we asked boaters how often they use their boat on average per month during boating season, and how does that usage stack up to their expectations. So the bars on this chart represent the percentage of folks who say that they use their boat less than expected, as expected, or more than expected. And I provide a separate breakout for not only the total sample, but also for those who bought their first-time boaters versus those who are repeat boaters. The first-time boaters are denoted in the darker blue. At the bottom of this page, I've appended the average usage per month during boating season. So on average, boaters use their boats about 3 times per month in season, although for repeat boaters tend to use their boat slightly more. So as you can see here, about 1/5 of total boaters use their boats less than expected, and underutilization is a bigger issue with first-time boaters, which is not surprising because these people, being new boaters, have a less idea of what to expect. But now let's take a look at why usage level matters. In this table, we're going to examine the likelihood of remaining a boat owner broken out by those who say that they use their boat equal to or more than anticipated versus those who use their boat less than anticipated, okay? So for those who use their boat equal to or more than anticipated, 95% of respondents said that they definitely or probably will remain a boater in 5 years. But for those who say that they use their boat less than anticipated, this drops down to 71%, so a 24% decline. So this begs the question, why are some people not using their boat as often as they would like? So we asked boaters to indicate that in our survey. This chart shows the main reason given for why they use their boat less than expected among the total sample. And what we found is the primary reason was not due to a lack of interest in boating, but rather due to family and work obligations. So 31% and 19% respectively. And this pattern was the same for both first-time boaters and repeat boaters, with one exception. First-time boaters were more likely to cite or to indicate that family obligations were a bigger impediment. 40% selected that versus only 25% for repeat boaters. And this too is not surprising because first-time boaters tend to be younger, have younger kids at home, and you know, the responsibilities that goes with that. So the key point I want to make on this chart is that we need to think about boating competitors differently. It's not just about other recreational products or activities. It is anything, whether work or play, that cuts into families' discretionary time. During the pandemic, those other time competitors suddenly went away or were reduced, which is much of the reason why I believe we saw the surge in boating that we did. So as you may recall, the ultimate goal of this study was to identify opportunities to enhance the boat ownership experience in order to keep more people in boating. So near the end of the survey, we asked respondents how likely they are to remain a boater over the next 5 years. Choices range from definitely will to definitely will not. These results are for the total sample. As you can see, at this relatively early point in their ownership cycle, very few, roughly 11 to 12%, are thinking of exiting boating. Now let's take a look at how this retention varies by segment. So this chart shows the top 2 box rating. In other words, the percent who said that they definitely or probably will remain in boating, broken out by the various segments. And as you can see here, though they are less committed than repeat boaters, a high percentage of first-time boaters, 85%, intend to remain in boating based on their experiences to date. Also note that the anticipated retention is essentially the same regardless of whether they bought their boat new or used, or whether they bought it from a dealer or a private party. Of course, the key question at this point is, why is it that 12% of folks are thinking of getting out of boating? So we asked them that question on an open-ended basis. The main responses are shown in this table. The 2 most common reasons why folks say that they may get out of boating is because of insufficient usage, as well as the cost of ownership. And as you can see here, insufficient usage was cited more frequently among first-time boaters. But as you may recall, a couple of charts ago, I had shown you that first-time boaters were also more inclined to say that they use their boat less than anticipated. So that's not surprising. As we will see, this is based on the small sample size because there was not a lot of people who said that they were considering getting out of boating. However, you will see in just a moment that this is consistent with some further analyses that I did that support the role of these 2 items. So in addition to asking boaters why they might or might not remain in boating, we can also identify the reasons statistically through the creation of predictive models. This can confirm the stated reasons for satisfaction or defection, as well as identify less common or subconscious factors that may be playing a role. So 2 interrelated models were developed, and the technique I used was called Ordinal Logistic Regression. And the only reason why I mentioned that is because if you're familiar with standard linear regression, please know that you do not interpret logistic regression in the same way. It's considerably more complicated. Now, again, you'll see I'll try to simplify that as we go through this. So as I mentioned, 2 models were developed. The first model was the overall ownership experience model. For this, I looked at 24 variables, but in the end, only 5 items were consistently proven to be predictive of overall satisfaction with the ownership experience. Those items were how much they love their boat, how reasonable they believe the cost of ownership is, their satisfaction with their level of routine maintenance requirements, their confidence in operating the standard equipment on their boat, and how often they use their boat. Some of the items that didn't make the final model included things like whether or not they were a first-time or a repeat boater, whether they bought their boat new or used, whether they bought from a dealer or a private party, their satisfaction with their purchase experience, whether or not they took a sea trial, the type of boat they owned, and various demographic characteristics such as age, gender, and income. So those things were not consistently predictive of the overall ownership experience. So once this model, the overall ownership experience model, was developed, the retention model was actually pretty straightforward because it's a derivative of that. So boater retention is a function of their overall ownership experience coupled with the frequency of usage and whether or not the boat is used exclusively for fishing. This last item is pretty interesting, and what it says is that anglers are more resilient. In other words, they see their boat as a means to an end, that is catching fish, as opposed to an end in itself. So if someone doesn't like their boat, they're more likely to get a different boat rather than to quit fishing. Now we're going to take a closer look at the items in these 2 models in a little bit more detail. As I mentioned, ordinal logistic regression is considerably more complicated than standard linear regression. So the easiest way to understand the relative contribution of each predictive variable is to do what's called a sensitivity analysis. In other words, I'm going to show you what happens if we vary each variable 1 unit at a time, what it does to the percent completely satisfied with their overall ownership experience, holding everything else constant. So the first variable, predictive variable in our model, was satisfaction with the boat. The scores range from 1 to 5, meaning 1 completely not at all satisfied to 5 completely satisfied. And so as satisfaction with the boat varies from a 1 to 5, the percent completely satisfied with their overall ownership experience increases by 57 points. So this suggests this item is highly important. As you can see here, the reasonableness of the cost of ownership also has a big impact. So as a reasonableness rating changes from a 1 to 5, that results in a 41-point swing in the percent saying that they're completely satisfied with their overall ownership experience, holding everything else constant. These other items, satisfaction with their routine maintenance requirements, confidence in operating the standard equipment, or frequency of usage, are all important factors too, but just not to the same extent as the satisfaction with the boat and the cost of ownership. So what is the point of all this? It's about priorities and knowing where to focus resources. I'm sure that all manufacturers on this webinar today are continually focused on finding ways to improve their products, and rightfully so. As confirmed in this analysis, satisfaction with the boat is of paramount importance. Okay, so it's good to focus on that. However, how many of you are also focused on identifying ways to lower the cost of ownership? And by that, I don't mean reducing the cost to increase margins, but truly lowering the cost of boat ownership for the end consumer, or looking for ways to make the routine maintenance requirements less stringent. Something relatively simple, such as educating your customers on how to operate the standard equipment, can also have a sizable impact on their overall ownership experience. So the bottom line is there are other things besides boat quality that can favorably or unfavorably impact your customer's overall experience. Okay, so now let's take a look at the factors that impact retention. So as noted earlier, there are 3 different items: the overall ownership experience, which we just talked about that, plus frequency of usage and whether or not they use their boat exclusively for fishing. One of the things I'm going to point out here is you see that frequency of usage appears here, but it was already baked into the overall ownership experience model. So that suggests that this item is particularly important if it still comes up as a separate item in the retention model. So here's the sensitivity analysis for retention. There were 3 variables, as you recall, in the model. And again, as I vary these one at a time, we can see what that does to the percent who say that they definitely will remain a boater. So as the overall ownership experience varies from a 1 to a 5, holding everything else constant, the percent saying that they will definitely will remain a boater increases to 80 points. However, satisfaction with their ownership experience is not the only thing that drives retention. Frequency of usage also plays an important role. So for this item, I broke out usage into 3 buckets. Those who use their boat less than 3 times per month, those who use it 3 to 4 times per month, and those who use it 5 or more times. And as you go from a low usage to high usage, that results in a swing of 32 points in terms of the percent saying they definitely will remain a boater. However, as I noted on the previous page, this actually understates the importance of this factor because the influence of frequency of usage is already baked into their overall ownership experience. So this is actually much higher than this would indicate. And the last item is how they use their boat. And so I'm really looking at 2 different things, whether they use their boat for fishing only versus those who use it for other things as well. And you can see those who use their boat for fishing are 20% or 20 points more likely to say that they definitely will remain a boat owner versus those who use it for other activities. So what this model shows us is that as an industry, we should be concerned with more than just satisfaction. Promoting usage is also important to help keep people in boating. So based on these findings, what can we do to improve the boater experience? Let's start with the shopping experience. One of the biggest frustrations with boaters during the pandemic was finding boats available near them. And contributing to this was the fact that online dealer inventories were often out of date. So be sure to update your listings whenever a boat is sold or a new boat is brought into inventory to keep your potential customers from getting frustrated or going elsewhere. In fact, I know from the qualitative interviews, we had a number of people tell us they had intended to buy a new boat, but we're not certain when the boats are going to be available and couldn't get an answer, so they went ahead and bought a used boat instead. Secondly, be sure to engage prospective customers who have expressed interest in buying a boat, either through some sort of CRM system or newsletter. One frustration boaters expressed during our qualitative interviews was that they would contact dealers to inquire about availability, but often would not receive a call back or updates. Of course, that is not always easy to do when you're scrambling to get boats out the door. I understand that. However, if you kept a list of interested prospects and followed up with them regularly via a newsletter to communicate current product availability, expected arrivals, new product introductions, or dealer specials, that could help to keep more prospective buyers in your sales funnel. Regarding the purchase process, boaters in our survey made it very clear that they are not very satisfied with the product overview received at delivery. And as we saw just a moment ago, confidence in how to operate the standard equipment on the boat is linked to satisfaction with the overall ownership experience. So at a minimum, dealers should be sure to devote an adequate amount of time to provide a thorough overview at delivery. But also that should be supplemented with handouts or follow-up information with concise instructions or videos to remind boaters of the key things they need to do to operate and maintain their boat. Now, this is an area where boat, engine, and electronic manufacturers can play a very important role. I would suggest that every time a new model is introduced, it would be helpful to provide a walkthrough instructional video or other key information that dealers then can pass along to their customers at or shortly after delivery. Another thing we saw from the survey is that a number of first-time boaters lack confidence in many basic boating skills right out of the gate. However, it isn't realistic to think that dealers could become the de facto driver's ed for boaters. However, what dealers could do instead is to assist by informing these new boaters of where they can find the resources that might be helpful to them. There are a lot of boater safety courses and instructional videos available online, including some that are put out by Discover Boating. Giving new or prospective boaters a list of these quality resources would be beneficial. In terms of the ownership experience, as we saw earlier, a key frustration with the dealer maintenance or service experience was not just the cost, but also the turnaround time. We also know that utilization is critical for ownership satisfaction and retention, and boaters desire to use their boats 3 to 4 times per month on average in season. Sometimes the work needed is routine maintenance or minor repair for an otherwise operable boat. In these situations, the goal should be to have the boat brought into the dealership close to when the work is to be performed to minimize the downtime to the end customer. The automotive industry does a really good job with this, and some dealers do too, but this is an area for improvement. So minimizing the customer's downtime. As we saw earlier, only a small percentage of used boat buyers go to a dealer for maintenance or service work. Of course, the key question that I don't know the answer to is why this is happening. Is it because of the expense or something else? Depending on that answer, targeting the used market for maintenance or repairs might represent a sizable opportunity for dealers looking to expand their service business. The cost of ownership, as we saw, is a major factor that impacts customer satisfaction and retention. As the price of boats continues to increase along with the cost to maintain them, our market will continually shrink to just those who are either highly affluent or can use their boat often enough to justify the expense. While there will always be a market for high-end boats, in order to broaden our market and continue to bring in newer and younger boaters, we need to continue to focus on ways to reduce the cost of ownership. And then finally, a major factor that impacts customer retention is frequency of usage. If you use your boat often, it is easy to justify the expense. However, the opposite is also true. So some of the things that get in the way of boating, excuse me, such as work or family obligations, are things that we cannot do anything about. However, there might be some things that we could do to encourage additional usage, meaningful usage, such as for pleasure boaters, this could include things like on-water shows or concerts, holiday parades, customer appreciation events, or new water sports activities. For fishing boats, things like tournaments already encourage this additional usage, but there might be other opportunities as well. The point is, as an industry, we need to focus on more than making great products. We also need to focus on opportunities to use them. So thank you for your time today. In a moment, we're going to take a few questions. However, before we get to that, here is my contact information if you have additional questions regarding the study that we don't get to here today. Also, I plan to do a series of follow-up articles based on the insights from this and other studies. So if you reach out to me on LinkedIn, you'll get notified of those articles when they are published. With that, I will turn it back to the team at the RBFF.
Thanks so much, Jerry. I know you had to significantly cut back on a lot of these slides to fit within an hour. So we're excited to kind of roll out the full research results here in the next few weeks. Just wanted to check with Charles or Bruna to see if we had any questions.
Yes, we definitely have some questions. Start with this first one here. Jeff Becker asked, do boat owners feel like they have enough information or tools that allow them to correctly identify their needs? So are they just walking in not knowing what they don't know, or is there something that they can do to help them along this process to get the information they need?
Yeah, so I think we saw in the survey that those, they were kind of moderately satisfied in that area, and when we explored that, it's really kind of an iterative process that a lot of folks go through. I think for a lot of folks, a lot of these first-time boaters, they do not know their needs initially. And so when I showed you those steps earlier, I mentioned that the order often varies. And so what a lot of folks do is they start looking. They go online and see what's available, or they go to a dealer and see what they have in stock. And as they start to look at that, that helps to shape or inform what their needs are. But a lot of people don't know that going in. So my process looked pretty linear, but the reality is it's really, they skip steps, they repeat steps, and there's a lot of back and forth. So I think for a lot of folks, they don't know their needs initially and try to figure that out along the way.
And kind of follow up to that, was there any kind of preferred way to gain that knowledge?
Okay, so yeah, you also have to keep in mind the time in which we did the survey was during the height of COVID, but I think it's not too terribly different than what would have occurred beforehand. In the full report, we look at some of the information sources that people used, and so that's all will be in that. I can tell you that nearly everybody goes online to look for information. So that's a key place that people start. And then I think it was roughly around a third or so of folks, both first time and repeat, by the way, talk to other boaters. And then of course they all go to manufacturer websites as well. But so going online is really important. And that may include looking at manufacturer websites, that can be looking at online classifieds. And folks will look at YouTube as well. And there's also some social media sites like Facebook Marketplace, Craigslist that people go, especially if they're looking to buy a used boat. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but for the most part, it was, again, heightened because of the pandemic, but there was a lot of folks do turn to online as to really get a lot of their information.
Great. The next questions, grouping a couple of them together. Was there any kind of demographics that were collected or location information that was collected that might be able to extrapolate on for specific groups of people or locations?
Yeah, we did gather that, and that information is kind of in the appendix in the detailed report that, again, may be available later on. But I can tell you that, just to run down some demographics, 90% of our sample response were Caucasian, 4% were Black, 4% Hispanic, 2% were other. And that's kind of pretty close to what we've seen over the years in terms of the racial composition. Income-wise, we had 10% who earned under 50K, 10% who earned 50 to 74, 18% who earned 75 to 99, 26% in that 100 to 149 category, 15% 150 to 199, and 22% earned 200 or above. 86% of our respondents were male. So some of that information, again, is broken out there. In the data, we're not breaking out the results by those demographic characteristics because we've, especially when you start looking at first versus repeat boaters, new versus used, and you start breaking out further, the sample gets pretty skinny pretty fast. As far as geographic location, what we did is we took we used state boater registration list for the bulk of the survey, and so we got a random sample across the nation from states that provide state boater registration information that we can contact. So there's roughly, I don't know, somewhere between 20 and 30 states that do report. So it would have been a mix across those states.
Great. And next question, talked a lot about dealers and individuals selling boats, but was there any kind of information gathered on boat brokers?
Actually, no. Great question, but there was just very few who bought a boat that wasn't from a dealer or wasn't from a private party. So we had some, but it was too few to actually be able to take a look at that. Good question, though.
And next question, was there any kind of brand information that was collected during the survey? See if there was any kind of brands that had more staying power.
No, actually, we didn't go. Yes, I asked information in terms of what brand of boat that they purchased, along with what type of boat that they purchased, and I do that in every study because I want to make sure that they're legitimate respondents, and by comparing the brands and types, I can assess that. From an analytical standpoint, none of the questions really pertain to how well a given brand is doing in that area. And the mix of brands was very diverse. And so the responses will get, again, pretty skinny when you break that, you take a look at that down by the individual brand level. But that is a good question. And if I am a brand manager, I would want to know some of these similar, replicate some of the similar kinds of questions with my customers to see how well you're doing with your processes and your marketing and your sales activity.
And next question, is there any insights that you gathered on the boat rental market and how that might be affecting boat ownership?
That's a great question. I can actually refer you to a separate webinar that I gave back in 2020 that specifically went into the rental market and boat clubs. And there's a separate webinar on that. It's actually on the RBFF website, where I talk about that in length at that point in time. And so we go into specifically the ins and outs of the rental market versus the and the club market versus boat ownership, the advantages and disadvantages of each, why one goes one direction or the other. So that information is out there, but we did not address that in this particular study.
And with the current increase in fuel prices, do you think that will be significantly detrimental to usage and retention?
That is an excellent question. So as I pointed out when I went through this, and the quantitative survey was done last fall, late summer, early fall timeframe. So gas prices were a lot lower than they are today. And so in my analysis of that information, I saw that the cost for fuel was not a major driver, did not impact their overall cost of ownership. But the prices we're seeing now are higher than we have ever seen. So in statistical terms, now we're seeing a parameter that's out of range. So I really don't know what's going to happen. I am concerned because, as we saw, cost of ownership in general, not just the cost of fuel, but cost of ownership is a big factor. The price of fuel has gone up so dramatically that it is possible that something that was maybe not such a big driver could become one going forward. I just don't know the answer to that because, again, the environment has changed. The prices have changed dramatically since the short time ago that we did this study. But great question.
And is there any kind of increased or decreased satisfaction or likelihood to remain a boater when the boat is trailered at a marina or stored at home or in different areas?
Yeah, that is a great question too. I don't know the answer to that. I did in the survey ask where they kept their boat, kind of along the same kind of thinking, assuming that they might have a difference in their satisfaction and retention. But I did not break that out for this analysis. That's something that I can take a look at and see if there was a difference there. So that'll be a follow-up activity for me.
Right, and was there any kind of information that was gathered on like the onboarding process? So how much information was gathered when they first bought it, like from the owner or from the dealership, and did that influence how confident they were?
So, we in the survey itself, we asked about the sources of information that they used and how satisfied they were with those information sources. But we didn't, really go into trying to quantify the depth and whether they felt it was adequate. We just asked about their satisfaction. So you can kind of infer that from that information. And we saw that they were kind of moderately satisfied, but you may recall that 23% said that, they were not very satisfied at all with the shopping, the information or assistance available to them. So that would suggest to me that there is a bit of a lack of information from what boaters desire. So I think there are some better things that we could do to help with that. But as far as knowing whether or not they specifically said they got enough information, I really don't know that specifically, but can just kind of infer that from the information.
Right, and I know we are running out of time, so this will be the last question. I want to remind everybody that we will also follow up with questions or answers to the questions that were not answered here. So the last question is, was there any kind of size range that you captured for boats, and did that influence anything?
Yeah, I captured that information, and we had, as you imagine, just a wide range of boats across the whole spectrum. For the survey itself, we limited to boat owners who had a boat 14 foot or larger, but then we had boats go all the way up to 40 feet or even more. So it just kind of reflects kind of the representation in our sample reflected the representation in the marketplace. I did not break out and look at the results specifically by boat length, but we did gather that information, and that's something that could be taken a look at as well.
Thank you so much, Sherry. And anybody else from the RBFF team have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you everyone for attending. We'll be sure, we have all your email addresses, so we'll be sure to send out the location of this presentation. It's on our website. And just thank you all again for attending, and I hope you have a good rest of the day.
Thanks, everybody.